the four drivers of change, according to our National Intelligence Council, are first, the empowerment of the individual or the rise of the middle class. The middle class historically has been a fairly limited phenomenon. For quite some time it was limited to some parts of Europe, Canada, the United States, and maybe Australia and New Zealand. But that has changed. And that middle class is now a global phenomenon, which from the point of view of American diplomacy should be really a good opportunity, because we're largely a middle class country. We know what middle class populations are interested in, and we know how to engage with them. We're now faced with governments that have to help individuals not just have a voice in national destiny, but governments that have to provide individuals the opportunities and resources they need to have a voice in determining their own destiny as individuals. And that creates a very different political dynamic, and it creates a very different outlook in terms of how countries are going to try to use their foreign policy to affect what their individuals are asking for. The second big driver of change is the aging of the world, and the fact that large swaths of the world are aging at a very fast rate. In fact, within the next decade, the fastest growing segment of the human population is going to be people 60 years and older, which means I've just entered that segment. But as the world ages, and especially as large countries like China, or large economies like Japan, and Germany, and other European countries age, that has a dramatic impact, again, on the economies themselves and resource decisions. And this will affect the decisions governments make, and will also affect how governments relate with other countries as they look for resources that are going to allow them to meet the needs of large parts of the population that are no longer productive. The third major driver of change is the transformation of power, or the flattening of the world. And at its most basic expression, this is the fact that we are the lone surviving superpower, and that we have an ability to project our power anywhere at any time, but we do not have the ability to project our power everywhere all the time. And that means we have to be judicious about how we use our power, whether it be military, economic, political, or social, and we need to have an ability to determine what's worth it and what's not, and where we need to be working through surrogates and where we work with allies or partners. But the transformation of power also means, both domestically and globally, that many more people have the ability to affect outcomes that can be quite disastrous, and terrorism being kind of the most evident example of this. But it also means that increasingly you have what political scientists would call veto points, or increasing numbers of people and organizations with veto power that can actually stop decisions or inhibit the ability of governments to address issues. And this creates a whole different nature of conflict. It creates a whole different political environment in which we have to operate in. And the final driver of change is what our National Intelligence Council would call the nexus between food, energy, and water. And in many ways, this links back to the other drivers of change, especially as we see middle-class societies are rising around the globe, because people want energy, and they want energy not just to turn on lights. They want energy for refrigerators, they want energy for television sets and entertainment systems, they want energy for computer systems, they want energy to be able to travel, they want access to water for energy purposes, but also for food production, and they want access to foods that will allow them to be healthy. And in this regard, we're increasingly going to see in the 21st century, through this nexus for food and water, an opportunity to cooperate in areas where food, water, and energy meet, or we're going to see conflict in these areas. But as we look at these major drivers of change, what becomes evident I think to most of us is that they're going to create real challenges in terms of how our societies operate and how countries relate to each other. And they're going to drive pretty extraordinary changes in terms of how people live, in terms of how people create and innovate, in terms of how people prosper and how people think and how people govern and also how people fight.